All right. Welcome back to What's Going On with Earl Ingram. And we'd like to thank our sponsor, as always, the ACLU, for continuing to support us in this endeavor. It is that time again, my good friend and compadre and cohort and
Partner in crime,
partner,
maybe. Uh,
Sandy Williams is back. And welcome back, Sandy. How you doing, man?
Doing well. I'm doing quite well. There's lots of interesting things to watch. The Chinese proverb, uh, uh, "Beware if you live in interesting times." We're living in really interesting times.
Sandy, and it is with that statement that we are going to enter into another great conversation this morning. I don't know, Sandy, if you and I could have envisioned what we are dealing with right now. We all lived through. Some of us lived through 4 years of the president, and we saw some things that weren't so awe-inspiring. And we kind of saw some some things that kind of made us pause and say, "Thank God he's only gotten 4 years, and we got through it." But Sandy, what we're looking at today um, is just it's earth shattering. And let's talk a little bit about what you see as
Well,
far as the way
yeah,
things are constructed.
one of the things that has surprised me a bit is that along with the MAGA movement has come a change in norms with respect to how we present what we're doing and what we're thinking about doing as a nation to ourselves. And I would describe it as saying the quiet part out loud. In the past, we would embark on military activities abroad, and we would explain it always with lofty reasons. We would explain it with the notion that we were trying to install democracy in Afghanistan, we were trying to install democracy in Iraq, we were trying to fight communism and allow for democracy in Vietnam, on and on. And whether or not that was true, we also were involved in all kinds of machinations around the world, which we simply kept secret. So, yes, we were involved in the coup that got rid of Mossadegh, the democratically elected leader of Iran in 1953. But we didn't announce it to the public, and in fact, at the time, we probably denied it. We were involved with the coup that got rid of Salvador Allende as the head of Chile at a time when he was talking about nationalizing some corporations there and businesses there. And we installed a fellow named Pinochet, a general who ran a very despotic 19-year regime in Chile. And we didn't announce that. We didn't say that we were doing it, and we didn't describe it as doing it for the purpose of making sure that the corporate interests of America were protected in Chile. And so we've always given a different reason, a lofty reason for our conduct, and we seem to have abandoned that now. We're talking now about foreign affairs where we're seizing the oil in Venezuela. We're abiding by the Maduro, the remains of the Maduro government in Venezuela, which is a very despotic government. We've decided that Delcy if Rodriguez is the appropriate leader for us to deal with, even though she simply is the next leader of the Maduro regime. We're talking about taking down Cuba. We're talking about seizing the oil and controlling the oil in Iran. We're talking openly about the fact that Iran and oil is a big component of what we're doing with respect to Iran, even though we're trying to cloak it in the notion of nuclear weapons. We've opened up and started talking about gerrymandering as something that is an open activity that we ought to be carrying out in our state legislatures when it used to be the subject of investigations and litigation to try and figure out whether in fact we were carrying out gerrymandering. We've opened the discussion of race, and we have a Department of Justice and a Department of Education, which are actively taking actions against places that have attempted to pursue uh, opening opportunities for minorities as an assault on the white race, and we have really a very open now discussion about essentially making sure that whites are not prejudiced against or in any way deprived of their capacity to be in control of the country. Um, so we've begun to, and there's the list is longer. We'll get into it during this discussion, I hope, but uh, we're saying the quiet part out loud. And what I think is interesting is how will the American public react to this? If the Germans had said the quiet part out loud about the Holocaust, if because it's presumed that they tried to keep it a secret in some fashion, but how will the American public react, and how will the MAGA movement react when they listen to themselves saying the quiet part out loud and essentially embracing on an international basis American imperialism?
Sandy, you said a mouthful, and each and every one of those statements that you made need to be elaborated on. But we can't go through all of them in this time slot that we have. But what I would say to you, my friend, is it's not just what the American people are thinking; it's what the world sees. And so the world sees us as, you know, just people who are devoid of any humanity. When the president of the United States and the Secretary of Defense go before the world and say we're going to bomb them back into the Stone Age, that's where those people belong. I just wonder, Sandy, if what the American people's thoughts are, knowing that the world sees them. We have always been supposedly, Sandy, the arbiter of trying to, you know, bring balance and into nations that many felt we clearly were superior to in the way we treated people. And as a man of color, I have to tell you, Sandy, that what I've seen with the doing away with diversity, equity, and inclusion, affirmative action, these things, to see those things transpire and be done out in the open, and yet, you know, turning back of the clock, and not enough hue and outcry for those things is what troubles me, Sandy. Donald Trump won't be here forever, but it's the damage that he's done in this short period of time that the world and even this nation will have to reconcile itself to.
Yeah, well, my point here is that that's the thing that's going to be interesting. The American public has participated in this or has not participated in all of this, but they are now witnessing it directly. The smoke has been removed, and like I said, the quiet part is being said out loud. And then the question is, are these policies which we will continue to embrace on the arena of foreign affairs? We've taken on a very belligerent economic policy with respect to our tariffs, using tariffs as a weapon when foreign nations dissent from us. It's not that they become our enemies; they simply disagree with us on some policy, and we impose tariffs. We impose tariffs on Brazil because we don't like what they're doing internally in their country with respect to their ex-leader. We impose tariffs on countries simply because their presidents or prime ministers have the temerity to criticize the president, and so he then imposes tariffs. From the standpoint of warfare, the Geneva Convention was adopted. The Americans participated in the Geneva Convention, um, And it sets rules for warfare that are designed to actually protect the combatants as well as civilians from improper kinds of and basically unlawful warfare. And some of those rules apply to the ability to attack civilian targets. And the standards for attacking a civilian target is that the military advantages to be obtained from it must outweigh the damage that's going to be done to the civilians. Well, we seem to have abandoned that altogether. In fact, the Department of Defense or War, as he wants to call it, Peter Hegseth, talks about the fact that we've removed all these silly rules of engagement from our military so that they can operate with full lethality. Well, if full lethality means bombing bridges without a military objective, if it means bombing civilians without proper military objective, if it means bringing a country into the Stone Age, meaning to just demolish its infrastructure for the purpose of bringing a country to its absolute knees, of course, the damage that's being done there is primarily to civilians. And it's an interesting strategy to employ when our administration is saying that they believe that, and I'm quite sure it's an exaggerated number, that 90% of Iranians do not favor their current administration and would like a new administration, when bringing a country back to the Stone Age is essentially doing damage to that very 90%. It's really an attack on the civilians, not an attack on the military or the administration. And so internationally, we've been now saying the quiet part out loud. Our conduct belies any notion that we're doing things in a constructive, lawful manner. The same is true with respect to how we're deploying our government's power to, for instance, contract. If a corporation CEO has the temerity to be critical of the administration announces that there will be no longer any federal contracting done with that company. Well, a CEO of a company is going to be very careful about opening their mouth in any way if it's going to put its corporation, the employees, and its shareholders in jeopardy. And so that's had a very chilling effect. The same is true with respect to institutional broadcasting. If institutional broadcasting doesn't toe the line with respect to how they carry news, particularly most recently about the Iranian war, the head of the FCC has announced that they will consider pulling the license. Well, that has a very chilling effect as well. I mean, putting an institutional media source out of business altogether is a remedy that has a very chilling effect on what that media source might be willing to talk about.
You know, Sandy, the American people. He's not just attacking those entities that you spoke of at the beginning of our conversation, but the average person in this nation. He said this on yesterday. He said we can't focus on social programs. He said, I don't know if you saw it. He said we can't focus on daycare, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Our focus has to be on military protection. He said this, Sandy. He told the American people that what you need, what your desires are, and don't matter, because we've got to take care of something more important than your needs. We've got to protect you militarily. And so when you hear that, Sandy, this is not just about Democrat, Republican. It's not about Christian. It's clearly an assault and affront on all American citizens. Doesn't matter where you stand. He's saying that our nation can't support you in what it is you need. In the wealthiest nation on earth, we can't help you. We can't do daycare. The things you and I have been talking about, Sandy, for 2 years or more, he said we can't do that. We can't help you.
Well, and when we talked about it for the last 2 years, we said something's got to give in the federal budget. We've got these huge deficits. We've got at the time, when we first started talking, the federal defense budget was in the 5 to 600 billion dollar range. Uh, what he announced yesterday in the context of that discussion was a request that the federal defense budget be blown up to 1.5 trillion, which would be a 50% increase over its current level, which is in the neighborhood of $1 trillion. And all of this, of course, would come at the expense of the ability to spend money anyplace else. And it would come at the expense of bigger deficits because the $500 billion would consume most of or all of discretionary spending in the federal government. So if the federal defense budget were to fly up by $500 billion, you'd have to erase essentially every discretionary program. And that would, I mean, like, not just reduce it, erase it. And you would still be running deficits at record levels because you would simply have kept federal spending at the same level. So, you know, this assault is broad, and it basically is saying the quiet part out loud. People have long said, hey, this federal budget is depriving our country of the capacity to spend money on programs that are needed by Tom, Dick, and Mary. Well, yesterday the president announced that. And it's much, the only justification for it could be that Iran actually had a capacity to attack the United States. Well, there's no evidence of that. There's not even as much evidence of that as there is that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction before we invaded it. But it's now being said by the office of the president, suggesting that, well, Iran was even thinking about sending missiles to the United States, when the intelligence agencies would not suggest there's any evidence to corroborate that.
Sandy, you use the verbiage assault on the American people. It is that. It is an assault. It's an affront to say that, again, the wealthiest nation on earth, the American people, we can't do anything for you. You've got to, in essence, he's saying the exact same thing that he's saying to our allies when it comes to, at the Strait of Hormuz. Hey, we can't help you. You got to do that on your own. And I'm just wondering, Sandy, as this thing gets more out of whack, and I'm saying the president of the United States and the people who are in a position to tap him on the shoulder and say, hey, President Trump, you shouldn't have went on national television and told the American people that we can't help you with daycare, Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, those things, that's up to you. Our government can't help you. I mean, as you stated, Sandy, I mean, it can't get any worse coming out of his mouth than to say that to the American people.
Well, that's why my question is whether, in fact, there might be a positive here. Saying the quiet part out loud exposes the invidious aspect of the underside of all these policies and the underside of these expenditures to the American public. And now the question is, what will the American public do with that information? How do they feel about being an imperialist country? How do they feel about having their government run in a manner that seems very autocratic, and it seems to be used at the discretion of the political figure who's in charge of the country? How do they feel about a government's expenditure program that doesn't make it possible to provide the social services and social programs that are embedded in the fabric of the country in order to carry out military activities? How do they feel about it? And if they vote for it, well, then I guess we have to sit back and rethink what we think about the fabric of American society. But if they don't vote for it, then the question is, how do we move on from this in a manner that gets it behind us effectively? And that's not going to be easy, but at least if the American public decides they want to reject it, we would then be involved with the process of of rebuilding the American socioeconomic and political scene in a manner which would be responsive to that.
Sandy, the frightening thing to me in all of this is looking at another 3 years, 2.5 years, whatever. He, as you stated, I mean, there's clearly, I don't see any way possible, Sandy, that even though people talk about the Democrats and what they're not doing, that anybody would say, we need to keep the Republicans where they are in charge of the Congress and the Senate. I mean, the House and the Senate. And because, the Democrats aren't this or aren't that. And I got many issues with Democrats, believe me. But Sandy, the to overcome what is transpiring in this country right now, as you stated, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to happen quickly. He's kind of put us in a hole, in a situation that it may take a decade to dig out of or more, right?
Well, yeah, we're at a turning point, but I think we are at a turning point of sorts in that our federal deficit has become a looming problem, which Washington has to come to grips with. And coming to grips with it will definitely mean a completely new analysis of our priorities with respect to expenditures. Because if we have to shrink expenditures and potentially increase taxes, then we're going to have to do a triage to try and figure out where should we be spending our money and how should we be spending it. And the American public better roll up its sleeves and be ready to be committed to that, because I think saying the quiet part out loud has awakened all of us to why it is we're doing things and what effect what we're doing has on our society. Then the question is, how will our society react to it? And yes, I think we've had something close to a numb response right now. Number one, I don't think anyone was really ready for the kinds of changes. I mean, apocalyptic like changes in the
Right.
way we operate that have gone on over the last year. So people weren't ready for it. Institutions realized soon that they would be under direct attack if they undertook to be critical of it. So that quieted a substantial number of institutions and corporations who don't have their own morality and have to rely upon being fiduciaries for the people that own them. Um, and then it's the people. So now it's up to the people, it's up to the political process to figure this out. And if, for instance, in these midterms, the Democrats win in a material, significant sort of way at the congressional level, then Congress will and the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives will no longer be under the thumb of the presidency. The Senate might remain a Republican majority, it might not. If the Democrats take over the House is in a position to carry out investigations to investigate, for instance, another one of the things that's now being said out loud that used to be said quietly, and that is corruption in government and the ability of crony capitalism to make people very rich who are on the inner circle of the president. Well, that's no longer any secret. Uh, you can look at the Trump family directly. You can look at the cronies of the Trump administration and see how they are indeed directly profiting. So, there'll be investigations of that. There'll be investigations of a wide variety of things, the contracting that's been carried out, and all of that could put a throttle on the capacity of the president to operate in the completely arbitrary fashion that he's been operating.
So, Sandy, I want to go back to the verbiage again. I always listen to the verbiage of the things that are being said with you, and you use the verbiage shrink expenditures. Shrinking expenditures, again, looking at what they are: Medicare, Social Security, you know, and well, I'm just saying, I mean,
Yeah.
because if we've got to shrink things, And clearly, with what we are expending in this war, there'll be those who'll say we've got to replenish our supplies. And so we can't cut military spending because look at all of what we used. We've got to certainly, you know, increase spending to make sure that we at least get back to where we were. So in these expenditures, it's going to be very difficult to cut military spending. It means that for the foreseeable future, Sandy, in order to rectify these tremendous deficits, it's going to mean that the American people are going to have to tighten the belt even more.
Well, we're going to have to look at increasing taxes on people who are capable of paying increased taxes. We're going to have to find revenue sources. We're going to have to do it. And one of the things I think that the American public and Congress will have to wake up to is allowing the office of the president to have the extensive arbitrary power over the deployment of military resources is an extremely expensive in terms of financial risk proposition. This president decided to embark on this Iranian war, and and the price of it is already estimated to be $250 billion. Now, for an individual, the president, to be able to make a decision which is not premised on an immediate risk to the United States, in spite of his attempting to whisper that it might have been, um, without it being an immediate risk, he's made the arbitrary decision to expend in the neighborhood of $250 billion. Now, he's not allowed to make arbitrary decisions to tax the American public at that level. So why should the president be allowed to make independent decisions from Congress to expend that level? And you know the power of declaring war is embedded in under the Constitution in Congress, and we've deviated so far from that. And the military adventures that we've allowed the president to embark us on, Afghanistan. Afghanistan cost trillions of dollars. The Mideastern adventures of the earlier part of this century amounted to trillions of dollars of expenditure. Those trillions come at the expense of everything else that the government could be doing for the American people and at the expense of very large deficits, which put a burden on the future Americans. And so I hope that what comes out of speaking the quiet part out loud and letting the American public see clearly what we're doing and why we're doing it will cause a sea change in how the office of the presidency runs in the future. But we shall see.
You know, Sandy, I was listening to the over the road truck drivers talking about those rigs that they run can have, you know, a couple hundred gallons uh, of fuel at a time.
Yeah.
And can you imagine at the price that's that it's costing them to take these products over the road, Sandy? It's only a matter of time before the prices for everything really explode. We haven't seen yet. We've seen increases in the oil prices, but Sandy, it's at the end of that. It's what it costs to move all of this freight, and who's going to pay for that?
Well, and how much it costs to grow crops and buy
Right.
fertilizer. I mean, the price of oil does have a magnified effect in the economy because it's such a basic commodity that's built, the price of which is built into everything. And so, yes, it's going to have an effect. And the notion that number one, the price isn't going to go up more in the future is unrealistic. And number two, the notion that it's going to fall rapidly when the war ends is also not realistic because the infrastructure that's involved with uh, producing the oil, bringing it out of the ground, as well as conveying it and distilling and refining it, has been severely damaged in the war at the place that is essentially the center of the coronary vascular system of the international oil market. And the United States is not immune from international oil prices. We might have the capacity to be self-reliant on oil. But as long as the United States is able to export oil, as long as the government allows producers to export oil, that international price will set the price of oil in the United States, because if they can get a much higher price to sell by selling oil to Europe in the United States, they will do it. And so they will charge American consumers something like the international price, or otherwise they will ship that oil to Europe. And not only might they, but yesterday, uh, the president said, "Hey, one of the things you people in Europe ought to be doing, as well as opening up the Strait of Hormuz, is buying more American oil." Well, they'll buy it at international prices, which will immediately be the reason why the price of oil in the United States goes up very rapidly.
Sandy, you don't even have to close your eyes, and you don't have to be an economist or when an economist like Sandy Williams to understand that the world is being destabilized and it's early in this, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's real early in this. He can't, even if he says we're pulling out tomorrow, damage is done.
Well,
Okay.
the chickens have come home to roost on his assault on the European countries, on NATO, on international trade, his tariffs assault, his completely undiplomatic assault on the personalities. Yesterday making a comment about how Macron's wife treated him. Um, the breakdown between the United States and the countries that used to be its very close allies is clear. Okay, they have stood up to the United States with respect to the request being made of them with respect to this offensive war and by offensive I mean as contrary to defensive war in Iran. Uh, you know, Spain, Italy, England, Canada. I mean, these are countries that were very close allies to the United States, who have now decided that they will thumb their nose at us and they will find ways to make us increasingly irrelevant. And I hope that's another thing that's now being spoken out loud, which is that the rest of the world is not necessarily fond of the United States. And the ability of the United States to impose its will on everyone by exercising its might is an exercise that could well redound to our extreme detriment. And so far, that chicken came home to roost. We've lost the capacity for moral suasion with our allies with respect to a problem that we've self-created, which is this war in Iran.
We've got to take a short break to hear from our sponsor, ACLU. We'll be right back. All right. Welcome back to What's Going On with Earl Ingram and my co host and guest, Mr. Sandy Williams. And, before I don't want to say waste time, but to get into all the different, accolades for my good friend. He is, without question, just a great knowledgeable guy about a lot of different things globally and locally and nationally. So, Sandy, let me again try to envision. Let's say, he says, "Well, we got 2 more weeks." He said this now for the last two weeks in a row. We've got 2 more weeks of bombing. We're gonna bomb their bridges. We're gonna bomb their water filtration plants. We're going to bomb.
We're going to bomb
And,
our little hearts out.
Sandy, and the worst part about that is because, again, the rest of the world is caught up in all of this. And then, as if those things aren't bad enough, he still has time to say, we're going to take Cuba. And
No,
and
well, actually, I mean, just to correct that, and this is what I don't understand why Congress in America doesn't stand up more. He has repeatedly said, "I'm going to take Cuba."
yes, right.
So, I mean, this is a much more individualized kind of an approach to government, which is he, the president, is the manifestation of American power, and he's going to deploy it for his own purposes.
You know, Sandy, and when you hear that, that's bone chilling to me. And they continue to say how great and powerful our military is, as if it's a offtake of the great and powerful Oz in, the Wizard of Oz. They're great and powerful. And they just continue to talk about how great and powerful our military is. But it's not there to be used for your own personal use, Sandy. I don't know why people in power and in positions of leadership don't say to him, that's not your toy, right?
Well, the other thing is we've proved repeatedly that, in spite of our great military might, when we exercise it in places that require, for instance, if you're trying to manifestly change what's occurring culturally on the ground, you can't do it by dropping bombs. And so, we carpet bombed Vietnam. We even deployed hundreds of thousands of troops to Vietnam, but we didn't change the arc of history in Vietnam. We left, and within months, Vietnam had unified under a communist regime, North and South. We did the same thing to Iraq. We had shock and awe. We declared victory. The statue of Saddam Hussein was pulled down. There were supposedly elections that occurred. And within years of that, just a couple of years of that, political vacuum uh, was realized that was filled by ISIS and by Iranian supported militias. And so we took Iraq from an organized regime that had a leader that was not abiding by American interests, and to the point of maybe threatening the Kuwaiti oil that was part of an American alliance with on the control of oils of petroleum, and we took Saddam Hussein down, and we didn't achieve anything. We gutted Afghanistan, and we went from Taliban leadership to Taliban leadership. We participated in the gutting of Libya and the
Muammar Gaddafi,
decapitation
right?
of Omar Gaddafi, and has that improved? No.
No.
And so I just think there's no evidence that our military might, which can potentially win any particular battle, and not every battle, is something that allows us. I mean, the main military might that the United States has is the same military might that Russia has. It's the same military might that India and Pakistan has. It's our nuclear power, which is the ultimate deterrent. But if we get into a straight ahead war with a country like China, or even a country like Iran that has its own military industrial complex that can produce its own drones, that has developed a form of warfare which might be different from ours, Iran relies on inexpensive drones. And much the way Ukraine has exposed a weakness in Russia, Ukraine is in the process of exposing a weakness that we have, which is yes, we can drop bunker busting bombs, but can we really deal with swarms of drones in a manner that makes us immune from the kind of damage that brings us to a standstill uh, strategically? And we can say what we will about taking Iran to the Stone Age, but they are successfully, strategically holding us off. They've frozen the Strait of Hormuz, and have demonstrated to the world what a problem that is. They've targeted periodically the oil infrastructure of the allies of the United States in the Mideast, which has potentially brought those countries into a very difficult position and has exposed the inability of the United States to ultimately protect them and their infrastructures. They've done a great deal of damage, which we haven't talked about, to all of our military bases in the Mideast, to the point where numbers of them are unusable. And so, we can declare victory. We can declare that we've brought Iran's navy to its knees. They didn't really have a navy that mattered. We've brought their air force. They didn't have an air force to speak of. I think they had 35 planes, but we have not destroyed their capacity to resist. And That's something which we couldn't destroy in Vietnam, and we haven't been able to destroy elsewhere.
So Sandy, give us a little background, if you will, of what the impact of a possible global recession could mean to the American people, because things are certainly shaping up that way because of what's transpiring in Iran. Could it possibly be? Could we possibly be headed towards a global recession
Well, the
if this
rest of the
thing
world,
doesn't straighten out?
well, the rest of the world is more severely impacted by the Iranian war than we are, other than the fact that it's being the cost of it is being substantially borne by us, the actual cost from munitions, et cetera. But the rest of the world is going to suffer from an oil shortage, actually, because the belief is that the war so far has reduced the capacity to produce oil to the point where we have a 10 to potentially 15% shortfall in oil, which results in an immense fly up in cost and or rationing of oil or both of them to try and solve for the shortages. Um, and yes, absolutely, that could result in recession in the rest of the world. And like I talked about, I think in a prior one of our discussions and podcasts, this notion of stagflation is lurking because if we end up in an inflationary environment with a shrinking economy, bingo, that's stagflation. And stagflation is very difficult to get out from under because you can't do it with deficit expenditures, which simply stoke the inflation and don't necessarily bring you out of recession.
So, Sandy, there in all these things that we're talking about here, you know, there just is no quick fix. I don't care. Congress can't fix this alone. Um, he's the damage that's been done here. Um, I just wonder sometimes as we're watching people struggling. I was reading something the other day in the city of Milwaukee, and there's this single mother with three children, and she was appealing to somebody to help her with food. Um, that to me seems just improbable to think that in this nation, a single mother is on a social media asking, "Do you know what it must take to be able to get on social media and say, I can't feed my family, I can't feed my children." So we're going to see more of that, Sandy, not less.
Well, like I said, stagflation is particularly cruel. People lose jobs in the face of rising costs. It's a very cruel environment that is heartless in the fashion that you just described. And I think that one of the things that we now need to say out loud is the fact that the movement in the United States that was aimed at essentially unseating the old establishment, unseating the and took on the notion that expertise, particularly expertise in government, was something that was not only not necessary but was the enemy. It was the deep state. All these expert bureaucrats needed to be taken out of the government, and instead we should install people who would be very responsive to the electorate and to the changed ideas. Well, these people are the deep state in government were really people who were expert in government, who had a long term view of things, who understood the implications of what they might do. This is particularly true in the State Department. In the military, we had developed an establishment in the military which had embedded in it a certain kind of a respect for the norms, a respect for the Geneva Convention, a respect for a variety of things which have been thrown out, which the notion that the lethality of our fighters was simply being impeded by rules of engagement that might limit their conduct, that might restrict their conduct and make them the focus of investigations for committing crimes, war crimes, and uh, our the notion that we should elect a bunch of people into office who have announced that they don't respect expertise, that they don't respect experience, that they want to throw expertise and experience out the window and install in the Department of Health, in the Department of Education, in the Department of Housing, in our State Department, as the envoys carrying out our careful and diplomatic, careful and sensitive diplomatic affairs, that we should install people who have had no experience whatsoever, who who are declared simply to be bright people who are capable of now doing this without experience or expertise, has gotten us into a very difficult position. It's gotten us into a difficult position internationally. It's gotten us into a difficult position domestically. And so, can we ever get back to respecting expertise? Can we ever get back to respecting experience? Can we ever get back to respecting employment in government as an endeavor that should be respected? I don't know.
Sandy, the last thing is in keeping with what you just said, Pete Hegseth just got rid of a general who apparently was telling him something about the way he's got this war moving, and a general who's been there, who has knowledge, is telling him, hey, you're probably making a mistake here. You're probably doing that. Experienced guy was what you're just saying.
Yeah.
And Pete Hegseth, what does he do? Hey, I'm the guy in charge. Hey, hit the road. And it's that kind of flippant kind of response to things, Sandy, that is so frightening, right?
Well, I think that's an example of throwing experience and expertise out the window in the name of political loyalty. I mean, political loyalty is another way of saying people who will carry out the orders of the elected officials, who would assert that they're reflecting the will of the people. But the conduct we've had for the last year could hardly be said to be reflecting the will of the people, when very few of the things that have been carried out were the subject of direct discussion in the campaign. I mean, there was discussion about tariffs, and every time someone would try to pin them down on specifics, they would deny that these tariffs were ever going to be a problem or be so very sizable. Same with international affairs. The campaign was run on a notion of no more wars, staying out of wars. There was direct campaign discussions about how the election of a Democrat, Harris, would result in a war with Iran because she was incapable of carrying out the kind of negotiations that the now incumbent said that he would be able to carry out to avoid warfare. So, the things that have happened as the result of being responsive and loyal to the incumbent have not been things which would necessarily reflect the direct will of the people. And we'll find out in the next elections what the will of the people is, I guess.
Hey, Sandy, we've got to leave it there. I want to thank you as always, my friend, and we'll reach back out to you shortly. Hopefully, we'll still have a whirl the next time we come back together.
Yeah, I hope that's not in jeopardy.
All right, we got to leave it there. Thank you very much. That's my good friend, Sandy Williams. That's a wrap for what's going on with Earl Ingram. Sandy, see you later.